Consider this scenario. A charismatic leader promises to solve all your problems if you simply surrender your critical thinking and follow their directives without question. How do you protect yourself from such manipulation? Throughout my years developing the critical philosophy in Königsberg, I discovered that the human mind possesses an extraordinary capacity for self-deception when it abandons the rigorous use of reason. The very faculty that makes us human, our rational autonomy, becomes our greatest vulnerability when we fail to apply it systematically. The framework I developed through decades of examining the limits and possibilities of human reason offers more than abstract philosophical insights. It provides practical tools for navigating a world filled with false prophets, manipulative ideologies, and seductive but empty promises. By understanding how reason works, its proper domain and its necessary limitations, you can develop an intellectual immune system against deception. Today we'll explore how the critical method I established can serve as your mental shield against those who would exploit your natural desire for certainty, belonging, and simple answers to complex questions. This isn't merely about philosophical skepticism. It's about empowering your rational autonomy to think for yourself while remaining appropriately humble about the boundaries of human knowledge. Chapter 1: The Critical Method, Your First Line of Defense. The foundation of intellectual self-defense lies in what I call the critical method, a systematic approach to examining the presuppositions underlying any claim or argument. During my pre-critical period, I too was susceptible to accepting philosophical systems without sufficient scrutiny. It was only through rigorous self-examination that I developed the tools to distinguish between legitimate and illegitimate uses of reason. The critical method begins with a fundamental question: what are the conditions that make knowledge possible? This isn't academic hairsplitting, it's intensely practical. When someone presents you with a grand theory that explains everything, the critical method demands you ask, what assumptions underlie this explanation? What evidence supports these assumptions? What are the limits of what this theory can legitimately claim to know? Consider how cult leaders and political demagogues operate. They typically begin by presenting their worldview as uniquely rational and comprehensive, claiming to possess special insight into reality's fundamental nature. The critical method immediately raises red flags. How did they supposedly gain access to this privileged knowledge? What methodology validates their extraordinary claims? Why should their assertions be exempt from the ordinary standards of evidence and reasoning? The beauty of the critical method lies in its universality. It applies equally to religious dogma, political ideology, scientific claims, and philosophical systems, including my own. No human authority, however learned or charismatic, deserves unconditional intellectual submission. Even the most brilliant minds remain finite and fallible. This principle extends beyond obvious cases of manipulation. Consider how advertising exploits our cognitive shortcuts, how social media algorithms feed us information that confirms our biases, or how financial advisors promise guaranteed returns. The critical method trains you to pause and examine the underlying logic. What interests does the presenter serve? What evidence supports their claims? What are they asking you not to question? The critical examination reveals that legitimate knowledge has boundaries. Recognizing these limits isn't a weakness, it's a strength that prevents overreach and intellectual hubris. When someone claims absolute certainty about ultimate questions or demands that you suppress doubt, they're violating the proper use of reason. Chapter 2: Testing Claims Through the Universalizability Principle. The universalizability test I developed for moral reasoning serves equally well for evaluating truth claims and intellectual systems. This principle asks a simple but powerful question: what would happen if everyone adopted this way of thinking or acting? The answer often exposes the hidden contradictions and self-serving elements in deceptive schemes. Apply this test to common manipulation tactics. When a leader says, "Don't question my authority, just trust and obey," ask what would happen if this became a universal principle. If everyone in positions of authority demanded unquestioning obedience, rational discourse would collapse, progress would cease, and we'd return to intellectual darkness. The very principle defeats itself because it undermines the conditions necessary for distinguishing truth from falsehood. Consider financial scams that promise extraordinary returns through secret methods. The universalizability test immediately reveals the contradiction. If everyone knew and used these methods, they would cease to work. The promoter's success depends precisely on others not having access to the same information or strategy. This asymmetry signals deception. The test works equally well for ideological systems that claim exclusive access to truth. If the ideology were universally adopted, would it preserve the conditions necessary for rational inquiry and self-correction? Or would it create a closed system that immunizes itself against criticism? Legitimate intellectual frameworks remain open to revision based on evidence and argument. They don't require suppressing doubt or silencing dissent. This principle also protects against emotional manipulation. When someone appeals to your fears, anger, or desires to bypass rational consideration, apply the universalizability test. What kind of world would result if everyone made important decisions based purely on emotion without rational reflection? The answer reveals why emotional appeals, while sometimes appropriate, should never substitute for careful thinking. The universalizability principle particularly exposes the self-exempting character of many deceptive systems. The leader who demands sacrifice from followers while living luxuriously, the ideology that claims moral superiority while employing immoral means, the expert who insists on special privileges while denying them to others, all fail the universalizability test. Remember, this isn't about cynical skepticism that rejects all authority or expertise. Legitimate authorities welcome rational scrutiny because truth can withstand examination. They explain their methodology, acknowledge limitations, and remain open to correction. The universalizability test helps distinguish between legitimate expertise and illegitimate claims to authority. Chapter 3: Recognizing when you're being treated as a mere means. Perhaps no principle offers greater protection against manipulation than understanding the distinction between being treated as an end in yourself versus being used merely as a means to someone else's purposes. This insight, which emerged from my deep reflection on human dignity, provides a crucial lens for evaluating relationships, institutions, and social systems. Manipulators systematically violate human dignity by treating people as mere means to their ends. They see others not as rational beings deserving respect, but as instruments to be used, obstacles to be overcome, or resources to be exploited. Learning to recognize this pattern protects you from countless forms of deception and abuse. The violation often begins subtly. A manipulative person or organization might initially appear to care about your welfare, offering solutions to your problems or promising to fulfill your deepest needs. The critical question is, are they genuinely concerned with your flourishing as a rational, autonomous being, or are they primarily interested in what you can do for them? Examine the relationship dynamics carefully. Does the person or system encourage your independent thinking and decision-making, or does it gradually erode your confidence in your own judgment? Legitimate teachers, leaders, and advisors aim to enhance your rational autonomy, your capacity to think and choose for yourself. Manipulators systematically undermine this capacity because independent thinking threatens their control. Consider how cults operate through this lens. They typically begin by offering community, purpose, and answers to life's difficult questions, things every human being legitimately seeks. However, the deeper pattern reveals itself over time. Members are gradually isolated from outside relationships that might provide alternative perspectives. Independent thinking is discouraged through emotional manipulation, sleep deprivation, or social pressure. Personal autonomy is systematically eroded in service of the leader's agenda. This pattern appears in less extreme contexts as well. Abusive relationships, exploitative employers, and authoritarian movements all share the fundamental characteristic of treating people as mere means. They may use different techniques, emotional manipulation, economic coercion, or ideological pressure, but the underlying violation of human dignity remains constant. The principle also helps you evaluate information sources and media consumption. Does the source treat you as a rational being capable of weighing evidence and reaching your own conclusions? Or does it rely on manipulation techniques designed to bypass your critical faculties, emotional appeals, tribal identity, fear-mongering, or artificial urgency? Protecting yourself requires developing sensitivity to these subtle violations of dignity. When someone discourages you from seeking outside perspectives, rushes you into important decisions, or makes you feel guilty for asking questions, they're treating you as a mere means to their ends. Healthy relationships and legitimate institutions welcome your rational engagement precisely because they respect your dignity as a thinking being. Chapter 4: Goodwill versus Hidden Agendas, Reading True Motivations. My analysis of goodwill as the only unconditional good provides powerful tools for evaluating the motivations behind claims and proposals. Understanding the distinction between genuine goodwill and hidden agendas can save you from countless deceptions, whether in personal relationships, business dealings, or political movements. Goodwill, as I developed the concept, acts from duty rather than inclination, from respect for moral principle rather than self-interest. This doesn't mean that self-interested action is necessarily wrong, but it does mean that truly moral motivation transcends personal gain. When evaluating others' motivations, ask yourself, are they acting from genuine concern for what's right, or are they primarily motivated by personal advantage? The challenge lies in recognizing that manipulative people often master the language of moral concern. They speak eloquently about justice, truth, compassion, or the greater good. The key is examining whether their actions consistently align with these stated values, especially when doing so conflicts with their personal interests. Consider political leaders who claim to serve the public while enriching themselves through their positions. Business leaders who speak about stakeholder capitalism while systematically exploiting workers and customers. Religious figures who preach spiritual values while accumulating wealth and power. The disconnect between stated principles and actual behavior reveals the true motivation. This analysis extends to intellectual honesty. Genuine seekers of truth welcome evidence that challenges their beliefs because they value truth more than being right. They acknowledge uncertainty, admit mistakes, and modify their positions when presented with compelling evidence. In contrast, those with hidden agendas defend their positions regardless of evidence because their commitment is to the agenda, not to truth. The goodwill analysis also helps you evaluate your own motivations. When you find yourself strongly advocating for a particular position, pause and ask, am I committed to this because I genuinely believe it's true and right, or because accepting alternatives would threaten my identity, status, or interests? This self-examination protects you from becoming a victim of your own biases and self-deception. Pay attention to how people respond to criticism and disagreement. Those acting from goodwill engage substantively with objections because they recognize that criticism can help refine and improve their understanding. Those with hidden agendas typically respond to criticism with deflection, personal attacks, or attempts to silence opposition because criticism threatens their agenda. The goodwill framework particularly helps in evaluating charitable and social movements. Many organizations genuinely seek to address important problems and deserve support. Others exploit social causes primarily to advance their own power, wealth, or ideology. Examine whether the organization's methods and outcomes actually serve its stated mission, or whether the mission serves primarily as a vehicle for other goals. Chapter 5: Freedom versus Determination, Protecting Your Rational Autonomy. The tension between freedom and determinism that I explored throughout my critical philosophy offers profound insights for protecting your mental independence. Understanding this relationship helps you recognize when your autonomy is being threatened and develop strategies for preserving your capacity for rational self-determination. Human beings exist simultaneously in two realms: the phenomenal world governed by causal necessity, and the intelligible world of moral freedom. This dual nature means that while your behavior is influenced by countless factors, genetics, upbringing, social pressure, unconscious biases, you retain the capacity for rational choice that transcends these influences. Manipulators exploit this tension by creating conditions that maximize the determining factors while minimizing opportunities for rational reflection. They understand that rushed decisions, emotional arousal, social pressure, and information overload all compromise your ability to think clearly and choose freely. Recognizing these tactics helps you create space for genuine autonomy. Consider how high-pressure sales tactics work. The salesperson creates artificial urgency. This offer expires today. Appeals to emotion. Imagine how happy your family will be. Leverages social proof. Everyone else is buying this. And floods you with information to prevent careful analysis. Each element serves to minimize your rational autonomy by overwhelming the conditions necessary for free choice. The same principles apply to political manipulation, cult recruitment, and abusive relationships. The manipulator works to control your information environment, isolate you from alternative perspectives, create emotional dependency, and establish systems of reward and punishment that condition your behavior. Understanding these patterns helps you maintain the conditions necessary for authentic choice. Protecting your rational autonomy requires actively cultivating the conditions that support free thinking. This means seeking diverse perspectives, especially from those who disagree with your current beliefs. It means taking time for reflection before making important decisions, especially when others pressure you to decide quickly. It means maintaining relationships and information sources independent of any single authority or institution. The freedom determinism analysis also reveals why education and critical thinking skills are so crucial for human dignity. The more you understand about cognitive biases, logical fallacies, manipulation techniques, and the social forces that shape behavior, the better equipped you become to exercise genuine autonomy. Knowledge doesn't eliminate these influences, but it helps you recognize and account for them in your decision-making. This principle extends to understanding your own limitations. Recognizing that your thinking is influenced by factors beyond your immediate awareness doesn't negate your freedom, it enhances it by making you more thoughtful about when and how you exercise choice. The person who believes they're completely free from influence is often the most susceptible to manipulation. Consider how this applies to digital technology and social media. These platforms use sophisticated algorithms designed to capture your attention and influence your behavior. Understanding how these systems work doesn't require rejecting technology, but it does suggest the need for intentional practices that preserve space for reflection and autonomous choice. Chapter 6: The Limits of Human Reason, Staying Humble While Staying Sharp. Perhaps the most important insight from my critical philosophy is recognizing the necessary limits of human reason. This understanding provides essential protection against those who claim impossible knowledge while helping you maintain appropriate confidence in reason's legitimate domain. The critical examination reveals that human reason can reliably address certain questions, those concerning the conditions of possible experience, while remaining necessarily silent about others that transcend these boundaries. This distinction protects you from both excessive skepticism that undermines legitimate knowledge and excessive dogmatism that claims impossible certainty. Manipulators routinely violate these boundaries by claiming knowledge they cannot possess. They speak with certainty about ultimate metaphysical questions, predict complex future events with impossible precision, or claim exclusive access to fundamental truths about reality. Understanding reason's limits helps you recognize these illegitimate claims. Consider financial advisors who promise guaranteed returns, political leaders who claim to know exactly what policies will produce specific outcomes, or spiritual teachers who speak with absolute certainty about afterlife conditions. In each case, they're claiming knowledge that exceeds what human reason can legitimately establish. This doesn't mean all their claims are false, but it does mean their certainty is unjustified. The limits of reason also protect against the opposite extreme, radical skepticism that undermines confidence in legitimate knowledge. While reason cannot answer ultimate metaphysical questions with certainty, it can establish reliable knowledge within its proper domain. Science can discover natural laws, logic can establish valid inferences, and moral reasoning can identify universal ethical principles. This balanced understanding helps you navigate the complex information environment of modern life. When evaluating claims, ask yourself, does this fall within reason's legitimate domain? If someone claims scientific knowledge, do they follow proper scientific methodology? If they make logical arguments, are the inferences valid? If they propose moral principles, do these pass tests of universalizability and consistency? The humility that comes from recognizing reason's limits paradoxically strengthens your intellectual position. When you acknowledge uncertainty about questions that exceed human knowledge, you become less susceptible to those who exploit false certainty. When you maintain confidence in reason's legitimate achievements, you avoid the paralysis that comes from excessive doubt. This principle particularly helps in evaluating expert testimony and authority claims. Legitimate experts understand the boundaries of their expertise and acknowledge uncertainty about questions outside their domain. They can explain their methodology, identify potential sources of error, and remain open to revision based on new evidence. False experts often claim broader knowledge than their methods can support and resist challenges to their authority. The analysis also reveals why intellectual humility and rational confidence must work together. Humility without rational engagement leads to intellectual passivity that makes you vulnerable to manipulation. Rational confidence without humility leads to dogmatism that closes you off from learning and correction. The critical philosophy maintains both elements in proper balance. Chapter 7: Applying Kantian Vigilance to Modern Deception. The principles we've explored find urgent application in contemporary American contexts where sophisticated manipulation techniques exploit both technological capabilities and psychological vulnerabilities. Understanding how my philosophical framework applies to modern deception helps you navigate today's complex information landscape while preserving your rational autonomy. Consider how social media platforms use algorithmic manipulation to capture attention and influence behavior. These systems violate the principle of treating users as ends in themselves by designing features specifically to exploit psychological vulnerabilities, intermittent reinforcement schedules, social comparison dynamics, and fear of missing out. The business model treats user attention as a resource to be harvested rather than respecting users as autonomous agents capable of making informed choices about their own engagement. The universalizability test reveals the problematic nature of these systems. What would happen if everyone's information environment were curated by algorithms designed to maximize engagement rather than truth or well-being? We're witnessing the answer: increased polarization, decreased capacity for rational discourse, and the spread of misinformation that confirms existing biases rather than challenging them with evidence. Political manipulation in democratic societies presents particularly sophisticated challenges. Modern political movements often combine legitimate grievances with manipulative techniques that exploit emotional vulnerabilities and tribal identities. They may begin with valid concerns about economic inequality, cultural change, or institutional failures, but then channel these concerns in ways that bypass rational analysis. The goodwill analysis helps distinguish between legitimate political leadership and demagoguery. Genuine political leaders acknowledge the complexity of social problems, explain their reasoning transparently, and remain accountable to democratic institutions. Demagogues oversimplify complex issues, appeal primarily to emotion rather than reason, and work to undermine the very institutions that enable rational public discourse. Financial manipulation has evolved far beyond traditional scams to include sophisticated investment schemes, predatory lending practices, and cryptocurrency speculation that exploits people's legitimate desire for financial security. The categorical imperative provides clear guidance. Would you want to live in a world where everyone employed the financial strategy being promoted to you? If the strategy depends on finding other people who don't understand its risks, it fails the universalizability test. Conspiracy theories present another modern challenge that my framework addresses effectively. While skepticism about official narratives can be healthy, conspiracy thinking often violates rational principles by demanding impossible levels of proof for accepted facts while accepting extraordinary claims based on minimal evidence. The critical method reveals how conspiracy theories typically immunize themselves against refutation by explaining away contradictory evidence rather than genuinely testing their hypotheses. Healthcare misinformation exploits people's legitimate concerns about medical institutions while promoting alternatives that lack scientific support. The limits of reason analysis helps here, while medical science operates within appropriate boundaries and acknowledges uncertainty. It follows methodologies designed to minimize error and bias. Alternative health claims often violate these methodological standards while claiming impossible certainty about complex biological systems. The key to applying Kantian vigilance in modern contexts is developing systematic habits of rational reflection that resist the pace and pressure of contemporary life. This means creating space for genuine deliberation before making important decisions, seeking diverse and credible information sources, and maintaining relationships with people who will challenge your thinking constructively. Conclusion. The mental framework I've developed through decades of critical examination offers more than academic insight. It provides practical tools for preserving your rational autonomy in a world filled with sophisticated manipulation. By applying the critical method, testing claims through universalizability, recognizing violations of human dignity, evaluating motivations, protecting your freedom, acknowledging reason's limits, and staying vigilant about modern deception, you can navigate complex information environments while maintaining intellectual integrity. Remember that this framework requires constant practice and refinement. The capacity for rational autonomy that makes you human also makes you responsible for developing and exercising this capacity thoughtfully. No external authority, however learned, charismatic, or well-intentioned, can substitute for your own disciplined use of reason. The goal isn't cynical skepticism that rejects all authority and expertise, but rather the cultivation of practical wisdom that can distinguish between legitimate and illegitimate claims to authority. This wisdom serves not only your own interests but the broader cause of human dignity and rational discourse in democratic society. Take up the challenge of thinking for yourself while remaining appropriately humble about the boundaries of human knowledge. Your rational autonomy is both your greatest protection against deception and your most important contribution to the common project of human flourishing through the disciplined use of reason.